two things. One is I got fired for one of my jobs, which is whatever. When you've had as many jobs as I had, like you're gonna get fired a couple of times, right?
For real.
It always sucks. Don't get me wrong. Like
Yeah.
it always sucks. And I was feeling awful about myself because I was like, how the hell are you a career coach and you get fired? Like that's, you know, so I was like, that's like a really just a sucky situation. And I got fired because I was focusing too much on my business and not my actual like 9-to-5 job. So the thing that helped with that whole situation is that it gave me a lot of good perspective. One, it gave me perspective on the fact that like you're never defined by your failures. Like, you know, when I got fired, I thought that I was gonna have to stop talking or helping people because like I got fired. Well, what stance do I have to advise somebody when I couldn't even keep my job? I thought that I was gonna have to move from back from Montreal to Toronto in shame, right? So I was extremely cruel to myself. Like there were just some thoughts that I had about myself, about how pathetic I was because I lost this great opportunity. And I think the last thing was that I allowed it to kind of in a way mold how I viewed myself for a little bit. Now, I started realizing like first, like the failures don't really define you because like at the end of the day, like you still have a set of skills that you can market, that you can get out there. And B, it also made me realize just like how vulnerable we all are when it comes to our job process and why it's important for us to build up our own personal brand, right? And a personal brand is literally like, I like to think of it as your reputation for what you're known for. There, because people have heard from the grapevine about what you do. When somebody goes out and they search you up on Google, come across your stuff on the web, and they kind of form an opinion off of that in terms of like what your reputation is. So when it comes to like personal brand, like people should keep success logs of every time they've had a win. You know, people should keep track of their KPIs, even if they're not given out by management, because these are skills that they can't take away from you, even if they fire you, right? You're still gonna know how to do X, right? So either find some way to do it on your own and like project it out there, or like go into a new environment as a subject matter expert, using your failure of like educating you on what not to do. So that's kind of like how I kind of came back in it. And I also say that to the people that I coach, you know, don't let like the struggles that you're having define how you see yourself. Job searching, interviewing, salary negotiation, working at a crappy company, these are all heartbreaking and soul crushing experiences. Like have some grace for yourself.
No, 100%, man. I think you hit on all the notes on that one, especially the part about when you fail at something, the internalization of like beating yourself up, the negative voices. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt too. Trust me, I feel like I could write chapters on that alone. Hence why I have a podcast about failure in itself, right? So it's what I find interesting is the ability to take something that you know arguably didn't do well at, or for whatever reason happened, and then spin that into a lesson, whether it be for yourself or other individuals. And again, I guess at the end of the day, it's like for me personally, I want to make failure as widely acceptable as success. And I mean that in the sense that we're not afraid to talk about it. It's not something you try to sweep under the rug, even from a resume standpoint. Like you have a discussion, like, yeah, it didn't work out. Here's why. Here's what I learned from it, and here's how I've, you know, the knowledge that I've gained for it. So I love the fact that you were able to kind of take what didn't work out so well, spin that and work that into your favor. Now going on to question number 2. So what would you say, Jermaine, from your experience, are some of the challenges that Black potential candidates face from recruiters and employers? And in your opinion, what needs to change, man?
So it's multifaceted. So like on one hand, like we have to always fight against like that systemic conditioning. That report that I cited earlier in our conversation, the Brookfield report that told like 3.3% of Black people represent tech. it delved into like why we're also like the lowest paid ethnic group. And it's because systemic racism has conditioned people to associate poverty with Black people. Sell commercials about Black people living in huts. Like people see us and they associate us with poverty. It said that your average white citizen would have an easier time seeing a Black man in a suit and guessing he's a janitor, and then versus seeing a white man in a tracksuit and guessing that he's a doctor, right? So like
that's interesting.
You know what I'm saying, having that perception when we go into these salary conversations work against us, because like, and I use systemic conditioning and not systemic racism, because we know that we know racism is prevalent in this world. There are, because, and as a result of that, people have been conditioned to think one way, even though when like you read it back, their actions back to them, they might actually be horrified. But like the conditioning has them thinking, has warped what right or wrong looks like. And in a way, we are Black people are dehumanized because of the system, because like people don't have empathy towards us unless they're us. And it's not just with jobs, it's also with like in the medical field, right? Some people think, some doctors, or medical racism is basically doctors saying like Black women can take more pain than other
diagnosed. 100%.
Yeah. So it's like these perceptions bleed into like how we're seen on every level. And in tech, or in even any job, when it comes to salary negotiations, they're always going to assume that you'll be happy with the less amount, because that's what you're technically quote unquote worth. So I always encourage Black people to like always go in and like draw a line and don't be afraid to like walk away. The companies respect you for it, honestly. When you fight back, or when you not when you fight back, but like they present you an offer and you counter, they respect you. They respect you even if they don't like hire you for it. They respect you for like standing your ground and be like, no, I'm not. I know I'm not taking what I know I'm worth more than. I'm worth less than. So in terms of like for us, what we can do is we have to like find community, and in that case, that means like looking for places where we're respected, where there are a lot of us, or just looking for places where we can share information, right? You know, what should I expect for this kind of role? These kind of conversations around salary, being transparent with the information is how we can be best equipped going into these conversations.
I like that. Yeah, no, I really like that, because I think the community piece is huge. And I think personally, I know there are some organizations out here, like, you know, to a lesser extent, you have like First Fridays, and then you have, I think you were a part of it, the, was it Black Tech, you know what I'm talking about? Black Tech, yeah, BPTN. So I think there are networks out there that exist, but the sharing of information is highly valuable. And I think it lacks at scale here, specifically for Black professionals here in Canada. A few of the things that you said that triggered some things in my mind is, you're talking about that example from that report, how, you know, society at large would see, you know, a Caucasian man in a tracksuit and more likely to associate him to being a doctor versus a janitor, and the opposite of a Black man. And I had a similar conversation with a good friend of mine, and that's saying that's the power of media. I was like, you know, you got to understand, for 95% of people, seeing is believing. And I'm all for, you know, these stories that we tell for the Black experience. But where I kind of draw a line is when it's the same story. And it's not to say that those stories are not true. When you're talking about, you know, Jerome grows up with a single mom, you know, dad left him, he lives in the projects or the ghetto. But those stories, got to understand, although true, they have an impact. If you keep telling the same story and it's broadcasted worldwide, globally, you are also contributing to the narrative, or how did you phrase it? The conditioning, right? And so I think it's very important for us, hence why I try to make a podcast that's a little bit different than what would be, you know, just focus on like pop culture and stuff like that. Although I do enjoy some of that stuff. The other thing I'll say is, man, with the systematic conditioning, as you described it, I also feel that it applies to us in hiring positions. Now, I'll give you an example, like a question that I'm asking myself, because I don't know if you're familiar with the Ryan Coogler situation that happened in Atlanta
Oh,
about a
this
month.
man almost died.
Yeah, so that actually happened in January. But what I found so interesting about it, Jermaine, is the bank teller was black, and the manager of the bank was black, and the bank in itself was predominantly black,
The
right?
manager
And
was black back too?
exactly correct. So that's mind blowing, right? And so, anyways, my point of bringing that up in this particular conversation is that I feel like, irrespective of race, that systematic conditioning, it knows no color. So they're potentially less likely to happen that a black person could be in a position like you're in, where they can hire somebody and still fall victim to that kind of conditioning mindset, right? Where they're undervaluing or whatever their own reason. Because that just blew my mind. I was like, how does she do that when she? Anyways, that's my two cents on that.
I'll actually also give you an example of how it also affects people with good intentions, right?
Mhm.
I made a post about this on LinkedIn. I had somebody reach out to me. I didn't read the rest of their message because the first sentence was so like flagrantly racist.
Yeah,
It was coming from a good place, and
yeah.
let me explain, because that doesn't sound good. But he was like, he's like, Jermaine, thank you for making a post about the Black experience. I really appreciate your perspective.
Mhm,
I too grew up in poverty, and my mom had me at a young age. And I
mhm.
stopped reading there because I'm like, what about the Black experience made you think that poverty and a single mom or a young mom was going to
Mhm.
make you like align or make you
Mhm.
relate to my experience? I was like, dog, my mom had me at 27 in 1990. Like, my grandmother wasn't sure she was getting grandkids, right?
Right,
So
right.
you think because I'm black, like I
Yeah.
have a teenage mom.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I was like, I'm like, you trying to come in as an ally, but like
I
you
know.
don't have that conditioning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it happens all the time. And to your point, sometimes, it comes from an innocent place, or, you know, there's no malicious, there's no malicious intent behind it. But sometimes it's like, man, like, because to your point, when you're talking about in the tech space, like I work in the tech space currently, or I've always worked in the tech ad sales space, and I've always been the only one, or one of few, very few. And I can detail a time where, when I used to live in New York, I worked for an ad sales company on Wall Street, and I was definitely one of four, one of five. And I remember, I was having a tough time closing some deals, and they were saying, Corey, maybe it's because, you sound too urban on the phone. And to give you context, Jermaine, my market was the oil and gas market. So specifically, I was calling into the good old boys of like Texas, Louisiana, and then some international markets like Norway and Brazil and Mexico. But specifically, they were saying, they think we're having some challenges with those southern markets. And I was a young kid. I was like maybe a year and a half out of school. I was like 24. And Jermaine, sometimes I'm embarrassed to share this, but I actually changed my accent to a southern accent so I could relate.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because I was just trying to survive. When you're fresh out of uni and you got that debt, you're just like sink or swim, you know? But I definitely understand, what people can go through. But I'm so glad we're in this. I'm so glad we're at this point in society where these discussions are now open, although they be uncomfortable and they make certain people feel a certain type of way. But I think it's necessary to move the needle.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, yeah.
Part of the reason why I go by Jermaine L. Murray is
Mhm.
that I've held a couple of jobs under the name Lascelles, because Jermaine is a black guy. You know what
Ah,
I'm
that's
saying?
hilarious.
Yo, what am I like when you're like you're fresh out of school, you got debt, you need to pay for shit. I was applying for jobs, and my dad's a cynical Jamaican, right?
Yeah.
So like he was like, yo, your
Shout out
name
to
is,
all my Jamaicans out there.
shout out to all the Jamaicans, Jamaica, Jamaica,
Yeah.
Jamaica. My dad's like, yo, your name is too black. And I'm like, Dad, it's 2010. Like,
Yeah.
we don't do that anymore. And
Yeah.
he's like,
Okay.
Name is too black. And I'm like, he's like, just apply under a different name. So I was like, all right, I have the name Lascelles. It's a French name.
Yeah.
So I applied to a job. I'm not gonna say what the company is, but I applied to a job with the same resume twice. One says Jermaine, one says Lascelles. Lascelles got a call back in 24 hours. Jermaine is still waiting for his call back.
Wow.
I worked at that company under the name Lascelles for 4 years.
Wow.
So like sometimes they'd be like, yo, Lascelles, and I'm just like, I'm like, oh shit, that's me.